Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Week 6 of the NFL season. Gonna break down 3 game stacks, 3 teams that I'm gonna be way over the field on in my GPP lineups. Some good game environments, some low-owned players as well that you can use for some differentiation. And then afterwards, gonna head over to the prop side of things on Underdog and Prize Picks and give you 4 props I've already entered myself that you might want to consider adding for some of your exposure. So a lot to talk about. Let's not waste any time at all. And started off with the Draftkings side and those top 3 game stacks. Like this first game as a little bit of a sneaky option where we got Kyler Murray going against Jordan Love and the Packers. And what I like about this game environment is you got 2 competent offenses going against each other, which will give us plenty of options out there for buybacks, potential stacking options, which whatever quarterback you end up going with. But if you specifically look at the Cardinals side and we're to start with Murray over Jordan Love, you also get a little bit lower ownership. So at the quarterback spot, I've got Kyler Murray at just 3.5% projected ownership, Jordan Love at about 6.3%. So neither one is overly chalky, I would say, but under 5% is where you start to find some good leverage options. So Kyler Murray, if you start with him, maybe use a Marvin Harrison Jr., who's also going to be sub 10%. That would be a way to leverage it against the field. And if you're using a buyback like a Josh Jacobs, potentially going to a Tucker Kraft, Christian Watson if he plays, Jaden Reed, who's a little bit of a spend up this week, you're going to have a lot of high projecting plays in a relatively high total, one of the higher totals that we have on this week. And like I said, 2 competent offenses that you feel pretty good about. So the side that I prefer in my GPP exposure would be the Kyler Murray, just because he's a little bit lower owned. This game, especially like a Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, some of the buyback options that you use, even Josh Jacobs getting some attention himself, it's going to be a little bit harder to get leverage on the Packers. So that's why I'm starting my lineups over here on the Cardinals and potentially using those players as buybacks. Of course, you still have 4 or 5 other spots to differentiate, but when you start off with a slightly lower owned option like Kyler Murray, it just does wonders for the rest of your lineup construction. So I like some of the sneakier options here, particularly in the larger field contest where you need to leverage yourself, need to make sure we're getting unique in even a 50, 100,000 entry contest, and he certainly helps you with both of those aspects. Worth noting that the ownership over here is posted for my Patreon members, so we're not going to click through this too much, unfortunately, but as previously mentioned, Jaden Reed nearly 15%, so definitely one of the higher owned options at wide receiver, but Marvin Harrison Jr. here is going to be sub 5%. So if that offense ends up clicking, you've seen Marvin Harrison be a favorite target of Kyler Murray already, you're going to be at a much lower product ownership than starting with a Jordan Love, who's at 6% ownership, and then of course Jaden Reed here is like 6% higher owned than Marvin Harrison. So that's the main idea when it comes to my GPP exposure. Still a game that I think is rich out there in fantasy targets, but maybe a better side to approach it than the rest of the field is. Next up, we've got Jared Goff, a very similar type play going against the Dallas Cowboys. This is the highest point total of anything on the Week 6 slate, and when you have Jared Goff at just 3.1% ownership, and somebody like Dak Prescott at over 10%, in fact, I've got him at 11.2% ownership, like you can see on the sheet here, it makes it an obvious choice in GPPs. Jared Goff, that offense can be passing heavy from time to time, a lot of depending on the game script. If they get shut down in the run, they will go to a completely attacking approach through the air, and sometimes if they're getting the rush going, they'll commit to that for all 4 quarters as well. So I think it could go one of 2 directions, but what you're seeing a lot of the field do here is playing those Detroit running backs. They've got Jahmyr Gibbs at 7.5% ownership, David Montgomery over 6% himself, and then the quarterback situation here at sub 5% ownership, in fact getting close to that 3% ownership number. So just like a Kyler Murray, if you want to get after one of those higher total games, one of the higher paced games on the slate, but you maybe want to do it in a differentiated fashion, which is great for the larger field contest, then Jared Goff is your guy. In Amon-Ra St. Brown, you may have seen the ownership before. He's also about 15% owned. In fact, he's there at 14.9%. So it's going to be tough to get a bunch of leverage there, but you're getting it with your quarterback. Sam Laporta's not super chalky at tight end. I've got him at just 3.6% ownership. You use those kind of players, especially a 3.1% owned quarterback, and you're going to be much better off when it comes to your product ownership than if you had started with a 10% owned quarterback on the other side. So I still like CeeDee Lamb. You can see he's in my player pool. Probably saw it before on the wide receiver tab. He's 12% owned, so you're not going to get a bunch of leverage with your buyback, but that's the beauty of having a Jared Goff there, right? We've already accomplished that with one of our 3 or 4 spots in in that stack. Maybe you take one other low-owned player on top of that. And by the way, Ferguson too as a buyback is like 28% owned. So there are definitely a lot of really chalky pieces in this game, which is why I don't want to start with an 11% owned quarterback. If we're going 11% there, 12% CD, 30% out there with Jake Ferguson, you can quickly see where the ownership is getting out of control. So this is more so for GPPs. If I was in single entries cash, I would probably still play Dak. In fact, Dak will probably still be in my player pool out there for this weekend. Same thing with Jordan Love. Like, he'll be in my player pool for Sunday, but the large field contest, the stuff where you have to get that differentiation, is where I by far prefer the other side of it. So that's the idea with those top two stacks, two sub 5% owned quarterbacks that are in some of the best game environments of the entire week. And then the last play we're getting to is a little bit different. So this is a slightly higher owned quarterback situation, but one that I think is fantastic. And it's not just because I'm a Steeler fan taking Justin Fields here, but 2 weeks ago, we talked him up as a play. He went out there, was the highest scoring player on the slate. Now, I wasn't expecting that kind of performance, but this is that same type of game. The Steelers are favorites. I think a lot of people are probably thinking it's a Najee Harris game. They've also got Jaylen Warren back in the mix, so maybe even looking at him as a potential option. This could be the Justin Fields show because he's been running the ball a lot more these last few weeks. We know the kind of rushing upside that he brings from the fantasy perspective, and if he goes out there, he gives us 60, 70 yards, maybe scores a rushing touchdown, is doing his thing through the air, that could be another 25 to 30 point game. And the Raiders defense, it's not a weak defense by any means, but it's also not one that really scares you as an opposing quarterback either. So as the Steelers' big favorites, Jacoby Myers might be out. Zamir White is still questionable as well. We already know that they'll be without Devontae Adams. That was established well earlier in the week. This should be a game that the Steelers are leading in, and I think the rushing attack could be a look. I think single entries cash, that's something I'm going to be playing, but people maybe aren't considering that it's a passing attack that gets there. Maybe they grow the lead with a George Pickens touchdown. Maybe it's Pat Freiermuth going out there and getting a red zone touchdown or two. I'm not going to be double stacking very often, so my stacks are going to be Justin Fields, maybe plus one wide receiver in most cases, and then one buyback over there from the other side, whether that's Myers or White that end up playing, a Brock Bowers, who's a fantastic option at tight end. I have a lot of mini stacks for this Steeler game, so the top two options might be more of like a traditional stacking method where I'm going quarterback, probably even two wide receivers or tight ends in most cases there. For sure, buying it back with those top two games. This bottom one is a little bit more of a skinny stack where it might be just one player that I'm stacking with Fields because of his rushing upside. And then the buyback, I don't know if you have to have it in every single lineup, but I definitely think that those premier options are usable out there as well. So that's the idea out there with these three different options. You can see up top, mostly going after those high game totals. Down here, it's the concentrated usage on a player that I think is going to have a fantastic week. And the field, the consensus out there in the community is that the rushing attack of the Steelers is the way to go about it. And sometimes the offense that everyone thinks is going to go off is a pretty decent option, but sometimes they do it in a way that you wouldn't expect. So a few weeks ago, that was the case with Justin Fields. I tried to make you guys all, show you guys that before that slate, and it's the same thing here. So if you didn't take advantage then, maybe go out there and play them this week and see how it works out for you. And now for the prop side, where I've got 4 props for you that you might want to consider playing yourself. So first off, on Underdog, we've got a Justin Fields under on interceptions, who's at 0.5, and he's about minus 130 to minus 140 for his under on books. So if you look at DraftKings FanDuel, that's where he's in that minus 135 to even minus 140 range out there for the under. So if you're a plus EV better, that checks the box right there, but also checks the narrative and projection box. So you've got the Steelers as sizable favorites. I've already mentioned that I think that they're going to control that game, and as favorites, they're likely going to pass a little bit less. And Fields this year has been excellent at protecting the football. He has not been asked to pass the ball down the field if they're playing from ahead, and if the Steelers are controlling the game, I don't see them taking a lot of unnecessary risks. On top of that, the Steelers are going to have some home field advantage here. You may say that's crazy as they're on the road against the Raiders, but last year in the same kind of scenario had about 75% Steeler fans, and I can tell you that as somebody that was at the game that's accurate. It was literally 75% Steeler fans, and when the Raiders were on offense, it sounded like a Steelers home game. So I think that he's not going to have to deal with that crowd noise. Maybe that's helpful out there for the interceptions. I think just in general, that's going to help the Steelers go out there and control that game. And the sportsbook odds are what makes this something that I really got to begin with. So 0.5 interceptions, take that plus EV lean, homer pick, you may call that as a Steeler fan, but it's a plus EV lean. So I guess a plus EV homer pick at the end of the day. Then we got this over on Jahmyr Gibbs, who I've taken this prop every single week, and it's only failed me one time to this point. And the reason for taking this over in Jahmyr Gibbs touchdowns is not only is he slightly favored to score, even on books like Pinnacle that have the yes and no option, he has a little bit more juice towards his over than under, but he also has the vulture protection here, and that's why I've been taking this every single week, because David Montgomery is about even money to score on Pinnacle. Other books even favored to go out there and score, which implies him to have at least like a 50% touchdown rate, maybe even slightly above that. Same thing with Jahmyr Gibbs being favored to go out there and score. So you've got maybe an over 50% hit rate there. We'll call it 50-50 just to be conservative about it. And even if it's like a 40% push rate over there with Montgomery, in reality, it's higher than 40% out there with the implied hit rate. You're talking about something that's going to void almost half the time, and then half the time go out there and hit anyways. So you can see why this would be plus EV. It's a much safer prop than taking it without that vulture protection, and still something that you'd be leaning towards the over on. So this combination here pays 3x. There's no multiplier on the Gibbs prop like there was for the first few weeks. So evidently they're starting to catch on to these vulture props not offering the same kind of value that they were before, but still two props that I took that were plus EV. And this might not technically be, right, because it's not like minus 130, minus 140 to go out there and score on books like Pinnacle, but the vulture protection is what makes it a plus EV prop. It's well worth that. In fact, it might even be a better lead than something that's that minus 130 to minus 140 range. And over here in Prize Picks, we got a few other props that I took. These two are different variations of props that I've taken either on Underdog or Prize Picks. Still props that I love out there for Sunday. So the prop I ended up having was Henry over on rushing attempts. That was at 17.5. That bumped way early this morning. But at 85.5, this is actually 1 yard lower than most of the sports books out there. In fact, last look, DraftKings had him at 86.5. I think the same thing over there on FanDuel as well. And Derrick Henry has a soft matchup against this Commanders defense. And I think while a lot of people are expecting, especially because they're so bad against the pass, for Lamar Jackson to go out there and pass the ball a ton, I don't think you're going to see that. Teams have played the Commanders. They've tried to pass the ball over them, and what has happened to those teams? They've gone spanked, right? The Commanders, one of the best teams in the NFL, and the reason for that is you can't let them have the ball. When they have that momentum, when they have the ball in offense, they've been unbelievable this year, right? They're hardly punting over there in Washington. Just a massive turnaround from year to year, obviously because of Jaden Daniels, and I think what teams haven't done against them that the Baltimore is built for uniquely is to go out there and run it down their throat. The stats might say that they're weak against the pass, but in my opinion, if I was a coach, if I was an offensive coordinator, and if it's obvious to me, it's probably pretty obvious to Baltimore what they should do. They haven't been tested on the ground. They haven't had a team that's gone out there and said, we're just going to run it over and over against you, keep that time of possession, and wear you down. I think you're going to see that from Baltimore, whether it's Lamar Jackson running out there or, of course, them pounding Derrick Henry. So that's why I took the over at 17.5 rushing attempts. And with how efficient he's been this year, he's looked like the Derrick Henry of old, especially behind a good run-blocking offensive line. Give me a 1 yard discrepancy, I'll play that for Derrick Henry too. In fact, I may end up playing this prop myself just because of that little bit of line value. Then the other prop, I've been eyeing this too. This might actually be the pairing that I take on Prize Picks myself. Very likely going to be the pairing that I add on my Patreon page. Of course, guys, just like that spreadsheet, you can find all my projections there on the Patreon page, all the prop slips that I'm entering as well. So all the different slips I'm entering Underdog Prize Picks are also posted there on the Patreon page. So check it out in the description of the video, a link to that to go out there and join. If I end up entering this, you'll see that on the Patreon page. But the idea here with the Saquon prop is that he's nearly minus 200 to go out there and score in some books. The books with the yes and a no option, he's over minus 150 to score. So more than just a lean out there towards the over. And this pays 2.5x. So it is a goblin prop. You're going to get a slightly lower payout. But I think the 2.5x is more than fair given the kind of juice that he has on sports books. And the matchup is fantastic. The Browns absolutely suck. They've sucked for the last 2 decades. So I don't know if anyone's that surprised by it. They are always have some sort of semblance of hope, and then they just end up getting crushed by week 4 or 5. And the rapist Watson is likely the reason for that. So Saquon Barkley, I'll take to score against that defense all day. That defense doesn't look anywhere near as productive as last year, and it's not necessarily their fault, right? They have a quarterback that can't hit water if he fell out of a boat, and they've got an offense in general that's turning the ball over 3 and out almost every single time. So I don't care if you're the best defense in the NFL. I don't care if you have was it the 76 Bears defense out there? They're going to look shitty when you have that kind of offense. So that's half the idea with this Saquon prop. I think that the Philadelphia Eagles are going to get a lot of short fields, and with those offensive weapons a little bit banged up for Philly, they've been leaning on Barkley in the red zone. So I think that's why the juice is so heavy there. If you can't tell, I'm not a big fan of the Browns franchise. I mean, pretty obvious for a Steeler fan that we wouldn't like them that much. Especially when their offense is that shitty. I mean, they're just easy to pick on, right? So I'll take the Saquon Barkley over on touchdowns, just giving my Browns folks a little bit of shit. A little in-division rivalry. Ain't hurt anyone. And hey, I think we play you guys in a few weeks, so that'll be fun between the Steelers and the Browns. But for now, I'll pick on them with guys like a Saquon Barkley. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the Week 6 preview. Before you hopping out of here, smash that like button for me. Also, subscribe to the channel and comment down below who you've got as the top scorer out there for this main slate for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. If you get that top scorer, you will win a free month, and there's no restrictions on it. No projection that you have to give me. Just once a player is taken once, they cannot be taken again. So early bird gets the worm. Claim your player down below, and best of luck with the giveaway. Best of luck with all of your exposure as well. Go out there, take down a GPP for me, and on the prop side of things, maybe we go out there and cash out on our slips. Should be a fun one. We've got a lot of really good games, high total games out here for this Sunday. So let's enjoy, sit back, watch the red zone a little bit, and hopefully sweat out some cashes over there in our exposure too.